A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome to On the Couch with me, Farida, Rabia, and Soki and Zinzi. This is 100.4 FM, where you hear the difference. This is On the Couch together with Lately in Land and Housing. This is your weekly show that discusses current affairs in political landscape pertaining to housing, evictions, equitable access to land, and 10-year security. Today we will cover FLISP, what it is, why first-time homeowners need to know about it, and how it works. FLISP has recently been renamed as First Home Finance. Our lines are open 021-699-1786 or WhatsApp us on 0786 10 11 12. In studio we have Malcolm McCarthy, consultant, and Nick Budlender, researcher at Difundo Kwasi. Good evening. Welcome to On the Couch.
Thank you. Lovely to be there.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Okay, so last week we had to clarify this notion around social housing is to rent, not to own. And so we want to continue the conversation and maybe unpack a bit more about what it would mean for South Africans to own property in South Africa when we're speaking about housing. Now, many of us know about, the RDP houses or the RDP program, which is now actually called the BNG or Breaking New Ground program. And also, some of us, if you've been, keeping up with us on Lately in Land and Housing, we have been speaking about social housing and how it can benefit you in this crisis that we have with housing. So what are the other programs that exist to provide state assistance to citizens who cannot yet fully afford housing on the open market? And how do people access these options, and how do these programs work out? Gentlemen, let's get into it.
Okay, great. So, there are a range of different ownership programs as well. Like you spoke about, there's social housing, which is rental, and then there's RDP or BNG housing, which is free housing for ownership, but only for households that earn less than 3,500 Rand a month. The other big sort of housing program that the government has, which is targeted at ownership, is called, it used to be called FLISP, which is the Finance Linked Individual Subsidy Program, and is now called First Home Finance. And, in a very sort of, summarized version, basically what it does is that if you earn between 3,500 Rand a month and 22,000 Rand a month, and you go to a bank and you get a loan to buy a house, then First Home Finance is basically a way for the government to provide a subsidy and to provide some money that is paid directly to the bank, and that then reduces your loan repayments every month. And the idea is that, particularly for first-time home owners, often it's difficult to save up a deposit or to have enough money to make your loan repayments. So the idea is that you provide this one-off subsidy, and the subsidy ranges from 30,000 Rand a month to about 170,000 Rand a month. No, sorry, not a month, in total. 30,000 Rand.
It's like 30,000 a month, okay. 170,000 a month, okay.
Can we all sign up?
Yeah, so it gives you 30,000 Rand once off up to 170,000 Rand once off. And that money will be taken off the total amount that you owe the bank, and therefore your loan repayment each month will be slightly lower.
Okay. So, Mr. Malcolm.
I was just, and you can use that money either to buy a new house, or you can use it to buy an existing house which is being sold to you, or it's possible also to use the money to buy a serviced stand. And you can also apply for it retrospectively. So that means if you've already purchased a house, but you meet the criteria, if you purchased a house in the last 2 years and you meet the criteria, you can still apply for the actual grant. Yeah.
Okay. So do I come to Difundo Kwasi and I inquire about this? Because again, last week we established social housing, RDP houses, and all those conversations. So do I just come to you guys and then we start the process?
No, I think the best way to do it is to speak to the Provincial Department of Human Settlements. They're the government entity that administers the grant in Cape Town generally. And how it functions currently is that you actually go and apply for a loan to buy a house. Once you've secured that loan, you then go to the Department of Human Settlements, the Provincial Department of Human Settlements, or the National Housing Finance Corporation, and you say to them, look, I've secured this loan, can I please apply for a FLISP subsidy? And then you go through the process and the money is paid directly to the bank. But there are other ways as well. So some government housing projects also include some FLISP units, which means that when those units are originally built, already the government intends that they're going to be sold to FLISP beneficiaries. So if you want to buy one of those, then you would go to the Provincial Department of Human Settlements in Cape Town. They're in Wales Street, and you'd go and inquire about which FLISP properties are available. And there's sort of pros and cons of both of these two different approaches. You know, if you go directly, you go and access a FLISP home that's in a government housing project, that might in some ways be a little bit more straightforward because you know that you'll be able to get the loan, and the whole kind of process is very much geared towards you getting the loan and the FLISP subsidy being paid in. But of course, then you have a little bit less choice about the location and the other kind of features of the house.
I wanted to ask about that because if I now have the option to buy a home and I can get a loan and say I've been saving, do you get the option to choose or where you would like to stay, or would that be an advantage, disadvantage? How would that work?
Certainly you would have the opportunity to decide where you wanting to purchase your place, as long as the properties within that area which is within the affordability of people on this particular income band. So when you look at, let's say, people who are earning 22,000 Rand as a joint household income, which is the top end of when you can get a subsidy, you probably find that they would have to find a house or flat which is less than around about 600,000 Rand or less. So it means the price itself starts limiting the areas in which you can actually purchase, because that's the nature of the private property system that exists in Cape Town. But there's nothing stopping you if you have somebody who's going to sell you a place in a well-located area for much less than they could get if they went on the open market, and you were going to buy it. Well, that would be fine. Can I just also add that up until recently, the policy was that you actually had to get a mortgage bond from a bank in order to be entitled to it. However, the government has now changed that policy. I think it was February this year, and they now allow you to also apply. For instance, if you've got a guarantee from your employer or a pension fund, or your employer is willing to loan you money, or you're involved in either a stokvel or co-op, or alternatively, and this is the interesting part about it, where you are able to find, let's say, a property which equals the amount that you would get for the subsidy, then you're able to get the subsidy. So if you look at the bottom end of the scale, which is sitting around 3,500, people at that income level are entitled to a subsidy of about 170,000 Rand. So, for instance, if there was a scheme where there were service sites on sale and that service site was, let's say, going to cost 160,000, and I'm not saying there is, I'm just saying as an example, then you would be able to go and request that you get this subsidy, and it would cover the total costs. But there's one other thing we just need to raise, and that is in terms of pricing and cost, and that is it's never just the straight cost of the property, because there are a whole lot of other extra costs that you actually have to face at the time of purchase. One of those extra costs is transfer fees, okay, and legal transfer fees. And now you are able to use some of your subsidy money to pay those fees. It doesn't mean that you get extra subsidy to pay those fees, but you can take a proportion of what you got and pay those fees, which means you've got less to actually place against the cost of the house itself. And then there are other costs involved, because as soon as you purchase, then you're going to be responsible for the rates that the municipality are going to be charging. You're going to be responsible for, obviously, electricity, water, and general maintenance on the property in the longer term that is going to be to your account.
And I mean, I'll just add on that I think it's very important when making a decision about whether or not to buy a house to consider all of those additional costs, right? Because they can change the affordability considerably. But in Cape Town, the city of Cape Town has recently amended their rates policy and some of the charges that they have, both for property rates and also for water and sanitation, so that households who earn below a certain amount can access discounted rates. So if your family earns less than 22,000 Rand, it's worth having a look on the city's website and finding out exactly which rates, rebates, or water and sanitation and electricity discounts you can qualify for, because of course that does make a difference. And
it certainly does, but what's worthwhile thinking about is if you are going to go down this route, then you should find out about those extra costs, because you need to do your sums, because even if you get the place, you're going to be expected on a monthly basis to pay a certain amount of money, and know what that amount is going to be, and you could certainly find that out from the municipality in Cape Town.
Yeah. I think it's very, very important to consider the complete costs. And then also the qualifying criteria. We spoke very briefly that first home finance is available to households that earn between 3,500 and 22,000 Rand a month. But you also have to be a South African citizen or permanent resident. You have to be 18 or older. You have to have never owned a house before, so it's only for first-time buyers. And then also you must never have received any other sort of housing assistance from the government, whether that was an RDP house or social housing or anything else. To qualify for the subsidy, you have to be a first-time home buyer who hasn't been assisted by the government before. And then, of course, because the way it sort of currently functions relies on you securing a loan from the bank, then a credit record becomes very important as well. And having sort of credit worthiness so that a bank is willing to lend to you. If you don't have a good credit record currently, it's not the end of the world. There's ways to rehabilitate your credit record, but that's something to think about for anybody considering this is trying to begin that process as early as possible, I guess.
0786 10 11 12 is the number you can send us a message on. We are speaking about first home finances and what you need to know. Yes, there is an opportunity to own, but there's so much that goes into it. I do want to, if you could just break down legal costs, what that means, what falls into that bracket, and then also what rates mean, because maybe I'm thinking about it, but I don't know all these terms.
Yeah. Okay, so when you transfer a property, you have to do, first of all, if it's an existing property, you have to do clearance with the municipality to make sure that there are no debts owing to the municipality on the part of the person who's the person who's selling it. You've also got to be able to check that in the deeds office that everything is correct, that the person who's selling you the property is the person who actually owns the property. And you've got to do a whole number of other steps which involve the transfer. And generally, you need to have a lawyer to actually assist you in making sure that all of those things are followed. So that's the one thing. Then, depending on the price of the property, you might also have to pay what is called transfer fees, which is a government levy for people who are actually, or government charge for people who are taking new forms of ownership. They used to say you'd have to buy your stamps, because that was the way it used to be indicated on the legal agreement that you actually signed. So that's the other thing. And again, it's very hard to guess, but it's dependent upon the and I wouldn't want to talk emphatically about this because it depends on them. But you would be expecting to be paying anything between 20 and maybe 35, 40,000 extra for that. However, there is a certain level at which you don't have to pay transfer fees. I'm not sure about that, but
I don't know the exact number, but there is a cut-off in house value.
So you could always find out about that. When it comes to rates is the rates, and as Nick has already said, the cost of sewage and the cost of rubbish removal, etc., etc. Those are charges to the owner of a property, which are actually charged by the municipality because of the services that the municipality is providing. And you can't say, oh, well, don't worry, I'll deal with my own rubbish, etc., because there's a responsibility of the municipality legally to do that. So you have to pay these amounts of money also for your water usage. And the water usage is two types. The one is what you use in your tap for washing and everything else. And then there's another charge, which is for the sewage, that is the removal of the waste, whether it's in your toilet or wherever else. And usually the sewage part of it is linked to how much water you actually use. So if you use very little water, your sewage charge would be much lower than, let's say, a very rich person who's a swimming pool and all sorts of other things as well. So, but it's a sort of information when you know which property you're interested in that you can actually get from the city council quite easily.
Yeah. And I mean, rates are really sort of one of the main ways that the city finances all the services, and the amount of rates that you pay depend on the value of your property as well. So if you have a very expensive property, then your rates will be a lot higher than if it's in a cheaper property. And like I said just now, the City of Cape Town has recently amended its rates policy so that people who earn below a certain amount, I think it's 22,000 Rand a month household income, that they can qualify for some level of rates rebate or rates discount. And obviously the less you earn, the bigger the discount that you get is. So that's definitely something that's worth investigating.
Well, it works both on your income, but it also works on the value of your property, because if you've got a property which has been valued and the valuation are done by the municipality is relatively low, then your rates are going to be relatively lower as well. And there is an exemption up to a certain level. I don't know precisely what it was, but again, the council would be able to tell you. And if your property is worth less than that, then you'll have a complete exemption from the rates, but not from the other charges. The other charges still rest with you.
So as a homeowner, even though if you are in visualizing that you're going to have a home, there's so much research you need to do. And I think you have to save also towards that, because yes, you can get the subsidy that could help you, but then those charges might just be a lot more than what you thought.
Yes, but I think that anybody who's wanting to go down that path, there are a number of places you can go on the internet and elsewhere in order to get a little fact sheet which says these are the calculations you need to make. And very often people can even get direct advice about that from...
I mean, the Western Cape Provincial Government has a particularly good web page, which is, if you just type in First Home Finance Western Cape Government or FLISP Western Cape Government, they have quite a good web page that explains a lot of what Malcolm and I are speaking about in terms of the additional costs and what to consider, and then obviously very importantly where and who you can find people to speak to and get advice.
So a listener sent in a message saying, Assalam, if you take the flips, how long do you have to stay in the property before you want to sell? Because after buying, you find out the area is not safe. My daughter bought 3 months ago, but have not received the subsidy the SLUPs yet. How long does it take? Sorry, the flips. And do you have to be married? Do you have to have kids? My son is an Uber driver, so he is a backyard dweller. How does he qualify for this?
Great. So I mean, the in terms of, I'll kind of work backwards. In terms of the whether you have to be married or have kids, as far as I understand, you don't have to have dependents or.
You do have.
You do have to have dependents.
You have to have dependents. So if you're single, you have to have a dependent, and so the dependent would usually be a child under the age of 18. And or you might have elderly parents who you're having to look after who would be dependents, but you've got to provide evidence when you apply that that person is dependent upon you. So you can't apply for this if you're just single.
And then in terms of the listener's question about, how long you have to wait until you sell, as far as I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Malcolm, but there isn't some sort of sale restriction on FLISP, unlike with if you get a B&G house, you have to wait 7 years before you can sell it. Yeah. But, of course, if you've taken out a home loan, you would still have to repay that loan. So unless you can get somebody else to buy the house and take over the debt that you currently own to the bank, then it's quite difficult to exit. So
And what you can't do is buy, sell, and then reapply for another FLISP, because the rule says that if you've already owned a property, then you're not entitled to FLISP. And it's very easy for the municipality, the government, and whoever's providing the subsidy to check that up, because they just go to the deeds register and find out if your name's on the deed register.
Is that a good place to be in? Like, for example, maybe you feel like, okay, I got this home, I'm happy, and I want to sell it for, I don't know, a better price. Is that a good position to put yourself in as a first-time homeowner?
I mean, it's tough to say. It would depend on your particular circumstances. I mean, obviously, if you have a stable income and you feel that you can afford a more expensive house and that actually kind of fits the needs of yourself and your family, then of course many people choose to kind of upgrade or to move into a bigger or more expensive place. But, like with any sort of major expense or major investment, you just got to move carefully and make sure that you're not going to overextend yourself. Because sometimes people go from a house which perhaps is a little bit small and isn't perfect for them, but then they try and buy one that's a bit more expensive. And if the income isn't stable or if the family suffers some sort of shock, you can find yourself in a very, very difficult situation. And your home can be repossessed by the bank. And, it's quite hard to fight a repossession because you've entered into this contract with the bank and you've made a commitment to them that you're going to pay a certain amount each month. So legally, it's quite easy for them to then claw back your property and take it from you, which is obviously a very tragic thing that does happen to families across South Africa.
And also, one of the things you've got to keep in mind is often you get this house and it's a big asset. Let's say it's worth 500, 600,000 rand, and you start thinking, oh my God, that money could be mine to use for other things like buying a motor car or whatever. But the ordinary advice, normal advice would be careful that you do sell that unless you really, really have to. You shouldn't be using it to buy motor cars and things like that, because those are assets that reduce in price over the years, where generally in South Africa, if you look over a period of time, the money invested in a house is actually growing. Rather, not always, but in many instances it is growing. So that's what you have to think about when you're deciding to sell.
I've heard a lot of conversations about especially people who get government houses, the RDP houses, and how they sell that, and then they find themselves in a very awkward situation. And you're saying that this happens often. Well, the numbers are there to show that this happens. 2 minutes left. Would you advise against that, as you're saying, think long term and not short term? Because you say 500,000 or 600,000, but your home safety and what you really wanted, would become questionable.
Yeah. I mean, I would. It's a decision that's not to be taken lightly, and that you should move slowly on. I would personally, if I did own a home, then I would be hesitant to sell it unless I had a very good reason to do so, because that is an asset. As Malcolm said, it generally gets better in value over time, but even more importantly than that, it provides a place for you and your family to live, which is invaluable.
I think just let me raise one other issue before we get close, and that is the challenge in Cape Town is finding properties that are actually within the range of the subsidy. Okay, because if you're purchasing a property, you have to show that you can afford it with either any savings you have, plus the amount that the bank is prepared to lend you, plus the subsidy that you're going to get. And very often the bank is very reluctant to lend to people whose monthly household income is less than 17,000. And where it happens that you are in that category, then they'll look very closely at your credit record as well to make sure that you can actually afford it. And the second part of that is, where will you find the house or the product or the land which is going to be within the price range that you can afford? And that's also quite difficult. So one has to think about that very carefully.
But again, something to do, if you are in that situation, go to the provincial housing office or phone them and ask them about FLISP properties that are available in your area, and they'll be able to give you some advice.
Okay, that's what we need to do, find more advice. I think we need a lot of thinking about this new South African dream of owning. But that's all we have this evening. Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Nick, for joining us. Up next is Reflections with Ayub Ali. So much more in store for you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.